The vast emptiness of space stretched before the human exploration vessel horizon, its sleek metallic hull cutting through the darkness like a silver knife. Captain J. Park stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing a small, unremarkable planet approaching their sensors. Varix 9 looked nothing like the vibrant worlds they had discovered before. Rocky terrain spread across its surface, broken only by occasional patches of pale yellow vegetation. Most exploration teams would have dismissed the planet as worthless, but something caught Jay's attention, a faint energy signature that didn't match any known planetary readings. "Scan again," he ordered his science officer, a young woman named Elena Rodriguez. The sensors hummed, cutting through layers of atmospheric interference. Moments later, a strange signal flickered on the screen. It wasn't radio waves or standard communication frequencies. It was something different, a complex network of signals that seemed to pulse and dance across the planet's surface. As the ship descended, the first visual confirmations came through. Tiny creatures, no larger than a human hand, scurried across the rocky landscape. They moved with a precision that seemed impossible for such small beings. Their bodies were a mottled gray, blending perfectly with the surrounding rocks, making them almost invisible to untrained eyes. The Varixi, as they would later be called, looked fragile. Their limbs were thin, almost translucent, with multiple joints that allowed impossible movements. Their heads were disproportionately large, housing brains that seemed far too complex for their tiny bodies. Initial ground teams were confused. These creatures showed no signs of advanced technology, no massive cities, no complex machinery. Yet, something about them was different. When research drones approached, the Varixi didn't scatter in fear. Instead, they observed. They analyzed. They communicated through intricate patterns of movement and subtle energy signals. Dr. Elena Rodriguez took the first samples. Her hands trembled slightly as she collected soil and biological specimens. Something about these creatures felt different. They watched her with eyes that seemed too intelligent, too understanding. "They're analyzing us," she whispered to Jay, who stood nearby in a protective environmental suit. "Not like prey, more like researchers." The first direct communication happened by accident. A young research assistant dropped a complex datapad near a group of Varixi. Instead of running, they surrounded the device. Within minutes, they had not just touched it, but seemed to understand its complex technological infrastructure. Jay watched in amazement as one of the smaller Varixi manipulated the datapad, its tiny fingers moving with a precision that would shame most human technicians. It wasn't just touching the device, it was communicating with it, understanding its core programming in a way that seemed impossible. Blood tests revealed something extraordinary. The Varixi possessed a neural network that was unlike anything humans had ever seen. Their brain structures suggested capabilities far beyond their physical limitations. They could process information at speeds that would make supercomputers look slow. "We're not just looking at a new species," Elena told Jay during their evening briefing. "We're looking at the most adaptable intelligence we've ever encountered." The planet itself seemed designed to hide the Varixi's true potential. Harsh radiation, extreme temperature variations, and limited resources should have made survival impossible. Yet these creatures had not just survived, they had developed a complex collective intelligence that allowed them to thrive. As night fell on Varix 9, the research team watched in silent wonder. Thousands of Varixi moved across the rocky terrain, their movements synchronized like a living computer network. They shared information, resources, and protection with the efficiency that defied their small size. J. Park knew they had discovered something special. The Varixi weren't just another alien species. They were a potential key to understanding intelligence itself, a tiny, fragile form of life that held secrets far beyond human comprehension. The research facility on Mars hummed with anticipation. Dr. Yuna Kim stood before a collection of Varixi specimens, her hands steady as she prepared the first neural cybernetic integration test. The tiny creatures watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Months of careful study had revealed the Verixi's most remarkable trait, an unprecedented ability to adapt. Their neural pathways were like living circuits, capable of rewiring themselves faster than any known biological system. Where most species would reject technological implants, the Verixi seemed to welcome them. The first augmentation began simply. A microscopic neural interface smaller than a human hair was carefully positioned near the primary neural cluster of a volunteer Verixi. The creature, named Dohun by the research team, didn't flinch. Instead, it seemed to lean into the procedure, its tiny body vibrating with an almost eager anticipation. Initial tests were beyond anyone's expectations. Within hours, Dohun demonstrated abilities that defied scientific understanding. Complex Tibertinigi, mathematical calculations that would take a human computer minutes were solved in seconds. Strategic simulations showed problem-solving skills that made current military AI look primitive. "It's not just an enhancement," Yuna told her colleague, Seokan. "It's like we're unlocking something that was always there, just waiting to be activated." The augmentation process wasn't simply about adding technology. It was a delicate dance of biological adaptation. Nanofibers wove through the Verixi's existing neural network, creating pathways that enhanced their natural abilities. Muscle tissue was reinforced with microscopic carbon fiber structures, turning their fragile bodies into something far more resilient. Military observers were initially skeptical. How could these tiny creatures barely the size of a human hand become effective warriors? But as testing progressed, their doubts transformed into something closer to awe. Dohun and the first group of augmented Verixi showed abilities that defied imagination. They could process multiple streams of information simultaneously. Their collective intelligence allowed them to work as a single unified system. Where one Verixi might be weak, a group became an unstoppable force of calculated precision. Training. Simulations revealed their true potential. A small team of augmented Verixi could outmaneuver and outthink entire squadrons of trained human soldiers. They didn't just learn. They evolved in real time, adapting to challenges with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. The ethical debates were intense. Some argued that they were creating something too powerful, too dangerous. Others saw it as the next step in evolutionary collaboration between biological and technological systems. Yuna remembered the moment everything changed. During a complex strategic simulation, Dohun's team didn't just complete the mission, they rewrote the entire operational strategy. They identified weaknesses in the simulation that no human programmer had ever noticed, creating solutions that were both elegant and unexpected. The augmentation wasn't just about making the Verixi stronger. It was about unlocking their true potential. Their natural abilities, communication through complex energy patterns, collective problem-solving, absolute adaptability, were now amplified by human technology. Military leaders began to see the Verixi differently. No longer were they a curiosity. They were becoming a weapon more sophisticated than any in human history. A living, thinking, evolving combat system that could adapt to any challenge. As weeks turned into months, the augmented Verixi continued to surprise everyone. They developed their own unique communication methods, a blend of biological signaling and technological interface that humans could barely comprehend. They shared information instantaneously, learned from each other's experiences, and grew stronger with each passing day. Dohun, the first augmented Verixi, had become something more than just a test subject. He was a pioneer, a bridge between what was and what could be. The small creature that once seemed so fragile was now a symbol of unlimited potential. Yuna watched as Dohun completed another impossible task, his tiny body moving with a precision that seemed to defy the laws of biology and technology. She knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, the birth of a new form of intelligence that would change everything. The first warning came as a distant rumble in the outer solar system. The Krell Imperium had discovered humanity's newest allies, and they did not approve. Their massive battle cruisers, each the size of a small moon, emerged from faster-than-light space like angry metal sharks. Captain J. Park watched the holographic display with cold precision. The Krell were not just another enemy. They were a species that had conquered hundreds of worlds, crushing everything in their path. Their technology was brutal, their warriors bred for pure destruction. Do-hoon, now leading the first Verixi combat unit, stood barely 40 centimeters tall. Yet, beside him, his augmented team looked nothing like the fragile creatures they had once been. Their bodies were now a perfect blend of organic tissue and advanced nanotechnology, each movement calculated with machine-like precision. The first engagement happened near Jupiter's orbit. 12 Verixi units faced 3 massive Krell cruisers, a fight that should have been impossible. Traditional military strategy suggested complete annihilation of the smaller force, but the Verixi were not traditional. Their attack was like watching water move through impossible spaces. They didn't fight like humans. They didn't fight like any known species. Each Verixi moved as part of a single, collective intelligence. Where one creature might dodge, another would strike. Their movements were synchronized, predicted, perfect. Krell weapons, designed to obliterate entire planetary defenses, found nothing to hit. The Verixi units flickered between energy states, becoming momentarily translucent, redirecting, weapon fire with mathematical precision. They were everywhere and nowhere, a living, thinking weapon system that defied all combat logic. Do-hoon's primary strategy was revolutionary. Instead of direct confrontation, the Verixi identified and exploited the smallest structural weaknesses in Krell technology. A microscopic adjustment here, a redirected energy pulse there. Entire battle cruisers began to tear themselves apart from within. Within 37 minutes, 3 massive Krell vessels were nothing more than expanding clouds of radioactive debris. 12 Verixi units returned without a single casualty. The human observation team was stunned. Military strategists struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. These were not soldiers. They were something else entirely. A living, thinking combat system that evolved in real time. News of the victory spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The Krell Imperium, who had never known defeat, found themselves facing an enemy they could not understand. How do you fight something that learns and adapts faster than you can plan an attack? More Krell fleets approached, believing their numerical superiority would crush this new threat. They brought thousands of ships, weapons that could strip planets of their atmospheres, technologies developed through centuries of brutal conquest. The Verixi and their human allies waited. Each augmented Verixi carried within its body a complex network of quantum processors, biological enhancement systems, and a collective intelligence that processed information at speeds beyond comprehension. They were not just soldiers. They were a living, thinking weapon system. When the next wave of Krell ships arrived, they found something unexpected. The battlefield itself seemed alive. Energy patterns shifted, gravitational fields twisted, communication networks collapsed from within. The Verixi didn't just fight the enemy. They dismantled their entire technological infrastructure. Do-hoon watched the battle through multiple sensory inputs, his tiny body connected to a network of augmented teammates. They were not 12 individual creatures. They were a single thinking organism with multiple physical expressions. The Krell began to retreat. For the first time in their history, they encountered an enemy they could not understand, could not predict, could not defeat. Humanity had found more than just allies. They had discovered a new form of intelligence, fragile creatures transformed into the most sophisticated combat system the galaxy had ever seen. The Mars research facility looked more like a living organism than a technological complex. Seok-Han watched as the latest generation of Verixi power armor took shape, each suit a perfect blend of human engineering and alien adaptation. These were not ordinary combat suits. They were living systems that breathed, learned, and evolved with their Verixi warriors. The first prototype had taken 3 years of continuous research, countless failures, and moments of breakthrough that seemed almost magical. Do-hoon stood perfectly still as technicians carefully integrated the new armor system. His augmented body, already a marvel of biological and technological fusion, seemed to pulse with anticipation. The suit wasn't just equipment. It was an extension of his very being. The armor looked like liquid metal at first glance, shifting and changing with each movement. Microscopic sensors covered every surface, creating a protective layer that could adapt to any environment in milliseconds. Where human technology created barriers, this suit created possibilities. Quantum-linked communication systems allowed each Virixi to share information faster than the speed of thought. A single unit could now process and distribute tactical information across entire battlefields in fractions of a second. They weren't just wearing armor, they were becoming something more. Siak remembered the early experiments. The first attempts had been disasters. Virixi bodies rejected traditional technological interfaces. But these creatures were different. They didn't just adapt, they transformed. Each failure became a learning opportunity, each challenge a chance to evolve. The new power armor could shift between solid and semi-liquid states. It could become nearly invisible, absorb and redirect energy weapons, and provide environmental protection in conditions that would kill most biological entities. More importantly, it responded to the Virixi's neural patterns like a living skin. During testing, Dohoon demonstrated capabilities that defied understanding. The suit could anticipate his movements before he made them, creating a symbiotic relationship between biological intelligence and technological enhancement. He could walk through extreme environments, molten planetary cores, radiation-saturated spaces, high-pressure atmospheric conditions, with ease. Military strategists watched in silent amazement. These were no longer simple soldiers. They were living weapon systems that could adapt to any challenge in real time. The Krell Imperium's massive technological advantage was being systematically dismantled by something they could not comprehend. Each suit contained a complex neural network that learned and evolved. Damage patterns were instantly analyzed and adapted. Tactical information was processed and shared across entire combat units instantaneously. Where human soldiers required years of training, these Virixi units became combat-ready in weeks. The symbiosis went beyond physical protection. The suits became a complete life support system, enhancing the Virixi's already remarkable biological capabilities. They could survive in space, communicate across impossible distances, and process information at speeds that made supercomputers look primitive. Siak watched as Dohoon moved through a series of complex testing scenarios. The suit responded to his thoughts before he could even complete them. It was like watching a dancer move with a perfect partner, each movement fluid, anticipated, perfectly synchronized. "We're not creating weapons," Siak told his research team. "We're creating a new form of intelligent life." The implications were staggering. These Virixi were becoming something beyond simple biological or technological entities. They were a perfect fusion of organic intelligence and technological potential. Each suit was unique, grown specifically for its individual warrior, adapting and changing with their experiences. As the first full combat tests began, the research team watched in silent wonder. Dohoon and his team moved like liquid mercury, their suits becoming extensions of their bodies. They were no longer just soldiers. They were a living, thinking combat system that could adapt to any challenge in the universe. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Dohoon entered. Standing barely 40 centimeters tall, the augmented Virixi warrior carried more presence than the massive alien representatives surrounding him. Centuries of galactic conflict had taught most species that power came from size, weapon strength, and territorial conquest. But humanity and the Virixi had shown something different. They had transformed weakness into unprecedented strength. Representatives from over 200 planetary systems watched carefully. The Krell Imperium's recent defeat had changed everything. What was once considered a joke, tiny creatures becoming galactic warriors, was now a reality that demanded respect. Captain J. Park stood beside Dohoon, a symbol of the human Virixi alliance. Their partnership represented more than a military strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent cooperation could achieve. The Virixi's journey from a fragile, overlooked species to a sophisticated combat force had become legendary. Their ability to adapt, learn, and transform had rewritten every known rule of biological and technological development. Dahoon's presentation was unlike any diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Instead of speeches, he demonstrated holographic displays showed how the Virixi's collective intelligence worked. Each movement, each tactical decision was a complex dance of biological and technological integration. The council members watched in stunned silence. The Virixi didn't just fight. They solved problems. They anticipated challenges. They transformed obstacles into opportunities with a speed and precision that seemed almost magical. Species that had previously ignored or dismissed the Virixi now sought their guidance. Research teams from across the galaxy wanted to understand their unique neural networks. Military strategists studied their combat techniques. Technological developers wanted to learn their adaptive capabilities. What made the Virixi truly remarkable was not their combat ability, but their approach to existence. They saw challenges as opportunities for growth. Where other species saw limitations, they saw potential for transformation. The Galactic Council's formal recognition was more than a diplomatic formality. It was an acknowledgement of a fundamental shift in understanding intelligence, adaptation, and potential. The Virixi were no longer a curiosity. They were a force that would shape galactic development. Technological exchange protocols were established. The Human-Virixi Alliance became a model of interspecies cooperation. Other marginalized species began to look at themselves differently, recognizing that potential was not defined by initial limitations. Dahoon represented something more than a warrior. He was a living symbol of transformation. A creature once considered too small, too weak to survive had become a key player in galactic politics. The final resolution passed with overwhelming support. The Virixi would be granted full species recognition, with all associated rights and responsibilities. Their technological and biological innovations would be shared, studied, and celebrated. As the council meeting concluded, Dahoon looked out over the massive chamber. Countless alien species watched him, some with wonder, some with respect, some with a newfound understanding that true strength comes from adaptation, intelligence, and cooperation. Captain J. Park placed a gentle hand near Dahoon, a gesture of partnership that spoke louder than any diplomatic speech. They had done more than win a war. They had changed the fundamental understanding of potential. The galaxy would never be the same. Outside the council chambers, news of the Virixi's recognition spread quickly. On countless worlds, small and seemingly insignificant creatures looked up with new hope. If the Virixi could transform themselves, what might they achieve? As the sun set on another day in the vast, complex universe, a new chapter of galactic history had begun. Not with the sound of weapons, but with the quiet promise of understanding, adaptation, and unlimited potential.